So thank you very much for being the moderator for this presentation, and thanks also to Results International for organizing this event. We at the GP, and I think I can safely say for my fellow panelists that this issue is pretty important for education moving forward, and so I'm looking forward to having a fruitful discussion and presentation over the issues involved. So my job is to sort of set the stage and to talk about trends in IDA financing for basic education with specific reference to sub-Saharan Africa. I'm actually going to adjust the mic a little bit here. My apologies. But I wanted to start by introducing the Global Partnership for Education. I don't know if many of you are familiar with us, but we are the only global grant-making organization whose primary focus is to improve education systems in the poorest countries. And we actually have a focus on IDA 1 and 2 countries. Those are the lowest income countries. The GPE was actually birthed in 2002 as a direct result of the Education for All movement in Dakar. Out of the promise that no country should be unable to achieve the EFA goals for a lack of financing. Since that time, it has mobilized significant additional resources to train teachers, build classrooms, and provide books and other education services. These resources amount to more than US $3.5 billion that are total committed to date, over 1.5 billion of which was committed at the GPE Replenishment Pledging Conference in Copenhagen in November 2011. Now, it's important to note that the GPE is not an implementing agency, but rather we coordinate and leverage the finances, expertise, and experience of our partners to improve education on the ground. And we do this by mobilizing resources and helping developing countries work with donors, civil society, and the private sector to achieve national education plans and strategies to ensure that education assistance is better coordinated and more effective, and to use resources more efficiently. But the bottom line is GPE is not an implementer, and it is only as strong as its implementers. Around 2008, we began to notice that for many GPE partner countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, World Bank IDA allocations, and my World Bank colleague Carolyn can speak to what these are specifically, but they're essentially soft loans that are available to the poorest countries who aren't able to access capital on the market. But these soft loans, or the IDA allocations for education, were decreasing and in some cases disappearing altogether. To give you a little bit of macro information on the global level, from 2001 to 2010, IDA funding for education nearly tripled. There was a huge increase. Most of this funding, however, went to 3 countries. India received 1.6 billion, Pakistan received 830 million, and Bangladesh 675 million. Around half of the remaining money was allocated to the rest of the world, around 200 million of which went to sub-Saharan Africa. So essentially funding for sub-Saharan Africa increased in the past decade by only 43%, comparable to worldwide, which was about 300%. This was not done out of a lack of need. In fact, UNESCO places the education financing gap at 16 billion, which Taka referenced. Sub-Saharan Africa's portion is around 66%, which amounts to about 10.6 billion. So there's a huge financial gap in Sub-Saharan Africa and a great need for increased financing. To give you a little bit of micro data, just to zero in on a couple of GPE countries. In Mauritania, they received 20 million in IDA financing in FY 93 through 95, 5 million in 02 through 04, and very little in subsequent years. And likewise, Zambia received 20 million in 93, 95, less than 5 million in 02 and 04, and very little in subsequent years. Both of these countries have received GPE financing. Now, there are a few countries where IDA financing has been used to complement GPE financing, and this is what we're actually looking for. Ethiopia and Mozambique actually come to mind, where GPE grants and IDA allocations were used in tandem to help support the education system. And this is what GPE is advocating for, that these two financing mechanisms be mobilized together to be able to support the education system in these developing countries. However, as it stands for now, IDA financing for education in sub-Saharan Africa in general has been decreasing over time. Now, it's really important to note that GPE as a partnership is concerned at any substitution effect of its grant allocations, including decreasing in bilateral funding or domestic allocations. Our goal is to increase financing for basic education overall, not only to channel our grants to countries that need it most. We are similarly concerned that other partners who implement our grants, besides the World Bank, not substitute their own financing. For example, in Burkina Faso, the Agence Française de Développement will maintain their bilateral program while delivering GPE grants through the same pool mechanism. This is an example of how the GPE should work. We also see a strong domestic commitment to improving education in sub-Saharan Africa. Over the past decade, GPE developing country partners in this region increased their domestic financing for education by approximately 6% per annum. In some cases, this has even been due to the GPE grant process itself, which requires that governments demonstrate a political commitment to education, which is most clearly expressed through budgetary decisions. Yet we are not seeing the same commitment from bank country directors in terms of the allocation of IDA for education in GPE partner countries. Now, because of its hosting arrangement, the GPE has a very unique relationship with the World Bank and is able to utilize many of its technical resources and expertise, and I can speak to this at a very personal level, in addition to working closely with them at the local level. And in practice, this means that the World Bank delivers GPE financing in 87% of GPE partner countries. And in sub-Saharan Africa, this number is also pretty significant. IDA presents a concern to the GPE, not only because it's been decreasing overall, but also because of its recent tendency to be used as a substitution to GPE financing. Instead of adding GPE grant money on top of IDA for education, finance ministers use IDA money for other things. Because ministries of finance have perceived GPE funds as essentially bank funds, they are more likely to allocate their bank resources from IDA, which are not earmarked for a specific sector, to other sectors. So the risk of substitution with an institution like the bank is much higher than with a bilateral agency that has appropriated development funding for the purpose of education. This is one of the things GPE is advocating for the bank to address, both by working with ministries of finance to elevate the priority of education investments, working with World Bank country directors to have them understand that this as they develop their country assistance strategies, and clearly communicating that World Bank financing is not necessarily GPE financing, although the two are very closely related. However, the GPE has consistently raised this issue with various actors of the bank, and despite a commitment in 2010 to increase its funding for GPE countries, and I believe that Tony is going to address this further, the bank is not on course to correct this problem yet. In some, education systems are missing out on important financing from IDA that could fill very real gaps with their education sector plans. This is becoming especially urgent when we consider the pipeline for GPE grant allocations. There are actually currently 26 countries in the pipeline applying for approximately $1.1 billion from GPE grant funding by May 2013. So far, estimates show that demand has outstripped GPE's available funding by nearly 25%. We're actually doing a lot of work to make sure we have the resources available for that. Many of these countries that are up for application are fragile states, which can be much more difficult to work in. Some of them, Chad, DRC, Nigeria, have huge out-of-school problems and are in line to receive the GPE indicative allocation cap of 100 million. But even this amount in these large countries with such need doesn't typically cover the huge financing gap. In this context, it is unsustainable for GPE by itself to fill the gaps left behind in many cases. Current efforts to work with bank management and staff, indeed at the very highest levels, to solve this issue are underway. We're very interested today, and then moving forward, to hearing the proposals from members of this panel as well as from the bank about how to better structure the relationship between us and the bank in order to ensure that basic education financing is increased overall, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Children without schools depend on it, schools without teachers depend on it, and the future of the Global Partnership for Education depends on it. Thank you.